In just a moment. We are going to ask if you would please mute yourself and turn off your camera because we're in the meeting forum in Zoom. We want to make sure that we're highlighting our presenter and our interpreters for accessibility today. So if you would please do that as you enter. I also want to let you know that we have captioning available on today's webinar. So if you need to access the captioning, you can enable that on the bottom of your screen using the closed caption button, CC. I want to point out that we have 2 interpreters with us today. Their names in their little box that you see are represented by NDC interpreter. So you'll be able to see that. Our presenter who will be presenting in ASL today is Lore Kinast. So please make sure that you're able to see Lore on your screen as well. We will get started here in just a moment. We're admitting some people from the waiting room, making sure everyone is able to come in. Okay, thanks everyone. We do want to be mindful of everyone's time, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Michaela Hamaker, and I am the Texas Hands and Voices Guide by Your Side coordinator, and I am also a mom to 3 kids, 2 of whom are deaf. One of them has gone through this transition to post-secondary life, so I know you're in for a treat because this is extremely valuable information that Lore is going to be sharing with us today. I want to give our Executive Director of Texas Hands and Voices a moment to introduce herself. Teresa.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Teresa Banda. I am the Executive Director for Texas Hands and Voices. I'm also a mom to 4 children, the youngest of whom is deaf and hasn't started this transition, but I'm looking forward to learning all about it today because she is 3 years away from high school graduation, so it's right around the corner. I'm also a hard of hearing adult, and so I am very thankful that we have captioning today. So if, like Michaela said, if you haven't already turned on the closed captions, and if you need that, it's right at the bottom of the screen. Michaela, did we need to cover any other housekeeping items before we get started?
This is Michaela. I just want to add, if you joined us after I made this announcement the first time, Lore is our presenter today, Lore Kinast. She will be presenting in American Sign Language, and she is accompanied by 2 interpreters from NDC. You will see their boxes marked as NDC interpreter. You should also see Lore's screen that is already set up to be seen. If you need technical assistance or you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box. We do ask that you go ahead and mute yourself and turn off your camera. Otherwise, I think we are ready to go, and I am going to turn this over to Lore. Thank you for being here with us today, Lore. We truly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And my apologies to everyone if my eyes tend to look all over the place. I have 2 monitors in front of me, and so bear with me as you see me look around. I'm here, and I'm excited to be with you today. I'm excited about today's webinar on the topic of transition to post-secondary life. I know whether you are parents or instructors, whatever your role might be, I would like to share some resources with you today, and as well as some personal stories. I work with the National Deaf Center on Postsecondary Outcomes, and my role is as a technical assistant. And in my previous role, I was a disability services counselor with colleges and universities for more than 15 years. mostly working with deaf students, but also working with students with a variety of disabilities. So I have seen this transition journey that many deaf students have made as they enter post-secondary life, and have worked with them closely. So I have a heart for seeing these students complete their journey and complete their education. I present with that history in mind, and as I share what I'm sharing with you today. I'm also a mom of a deaf daughter. She is graduating this May with her bachelor's degree in math and biology, as well as chemistry. So she's getting 3 degrees, and as a mom, I've supported her through that process and have been through it from that angle as well. And you know, we're still learning as we go along and have made changes as we go along. And I know every journey is different, but I feel like I'm pretty up to date currently with what is available. So let's go ahead and get started. First, a little bit about National Deaf Center, NDC. We are federally funded by the Office of Special Education Programs and the Rehabilitation Services Agreement, or the RSA. So we receive funding from those entities to do NDC's work. We have an amazing team who does know what it's like for students going through that high school and transition to post-secondary life. And our research will show that today. You'll see on different slides that our research shows that deaf students are not completing college or earning a degree at the same level as their hearing counterparts. So our goal at NDC is to change that. I will quickly mention that I'll use the term deaf throughout this presentation. When I use the word deaf, I am including those who identify culturally deaf and those who don't, those who are late deafened, deaf blind, hearing impaired, deaf disabled, people who have hearing loss, and who have additional disabilities. So whatever terminology people may identify with as a deaf person, I'm incorporating everyone who is deaf when I use the word deaf. We value everyone's unique experience and their varied backgrounds, and we want to honor those differences today. But just realize I will be using the word deaf to refer to everyone. When I talk about deaf youth, that could be deaf students, that could be your deaf child, that could be youth you work with. And so that's another term I'll be using today, is deaf youth. I want to start with some data that will help us get a better understanding of transition. What you see on the slide here is that 32.2% of deaf people have some college compared to their hearing counterparts, 38.8%. Those who complete an associate's degree are 4% compared to 4.8%. And then the bachelor's degree, it's 5.3% compared to 8.2%. There are also differences compared among genders and ethnicities as well. But for the purposes right now, we'll look more generally at comparing just in general deaf people with hearing people. Don't worry about capturing this or writing this information down. I will provide you with these statistics at the end of the webinar. This data was pulled from the American Community Survey, which is a part of the US Census Bureau, and the statistics they run every 4 years. This is specifically for ages 17 to 24. So this is really focused in on deaf youth who are transitioning. So keep that in mind as you look at these numbers. Now let's look at employment rates, and this is specifically in the state of Texas. And my apologies if the text is a little bit small, but 51.3% of deaf adults have a job compared to 74.2% of hearing adults. But it's important to look at those diagrams and the graphs next to those statistics. You can see 44.7 are not in the labor force, compared with 22.5 of hearing people not in the labor force. So what that means when we say not in the labor force is that any individual, deaf or hearing, is not actively looking for work. It could be they are a student. It could be they're a stay-at-home parent. It could be that they are taking a leave of absence for health reasons. So they are not actively working or looking for work. Then we have unemployed. And you can see the 4.0 percentage of deaf people compared to 3.3 of hearing. But the difference there is minimal. But when you look at not in the labor force, there's a big difference between deaf and hearing communities. So I want to look at that 51.3% of deaf adults who have a job. This gap right here is one we really need to be concerned about. With statistics here, you can see, and this is the last statistic I'll share for right now. I feel like it's important to share this because you can see the bright green, which shows hearing people, and then the darker green or teal blue that shows deaf people. You can really see the gap there among those who attain their bachelor's degree. And you can see that if people do attain a bachelor's degree, they have better odds of getting a job. And that's why we encourage that educational attainment so that employment rates can also increase. Even with a little or some college, we see an increase in job attainment. So it's a very important number to look at and to realize that education plays such a critical role in job attainment after school. So with that, and knowing those statistics, we have to think about how we will close that gap between hearing and deaf communities. You know, we think about transition, graduating from high school and moving on beyond high school. Most of us have probably had the opportunity to think about what we want to do, what kind of job we would like to have, and we want to give that same opportunity to all deaf youth. Transition age, often we feel like we can go through a checklist and make sure our children are meeting specific goals, but that's really not what transition is about. It's more of a live design model. It's allowing deaf children the opportunity to construct their own future. Sometimes deaf people are encouraged to pursue a specific job without giving consideration to what their passions and talents really are. Mm-hmm. So we want to allow deaf youth to grow, evolve, and it's definitely a process that changes over time. They don't have to come to a particular decision they stay with. I changed my major several times throughout my educational journey. So I think it's important that we allow youth the opportunity to strategize, to figure out what really interests them and find out where their passions lie. And that's an active and ongoing living process. to look at how their ambitions may change, how their behaviors may change. The bottom line is really there in the orange, what we believe matters. So we want to give youth the opportunity to know what they believe matters.
I'm
You
sorry,
can also,
this is Michaela. Can we hold 1 second?
sure.
Lore, we have a question in the chat box from Erin. She was talking about the graphic that you have up, and she asks, speaking of deaf individuals on the graphic, does that apply to deaf as disability only or deaf plus multi-disabilities?
Sure, that's a good question, Erin. We do have a separate graph that includes deaf with disabilities, and I don't have that statistic in front of me, but you can send me an email and I'm happy to share the specific page of that report that breaks it down into disabilities. We have deaf blind, deaf plus, and then just general deaf disabled. So I'm happy to share that more granular study if you would like to see it. Okay. So deaf high school students, as you see here at the bottom, whose parents expected them to go to college were 6 times more likely to go. So that's important for us. If you are a parent or you work with parents, it's really a matter of teamwork. It includes the parents, educators, and other professionals working in that student's life, as well as the student. Parents, teachers, and professionals all have a huge impact on that deaf youth's ability to determine their future, to plan and set goals. We have a huge influence on that. So we encourage parents to be involved. So how do we prepare deaf youth for college? I'll be sharing some ideas and resources as well, but I think it's important that we keep in mind that college is changing. Compared to what was happening at this time last year, college is a completely different landscape today. The workplace is also changing. Technology, as we know, changes at the speed of light. The abilities, the new jobs that never existed before, things are changing at a rapid pace, and we need to be prepared for that. We want to help students develop skills that will fit these upcoming jobs. And we would like students to be thinking about the future and how things may change as they are making their decision. They may try a variety of different jobs to see where there is a good fit, because there are such a wealth of job opportunities. It's just the new reality today. I don't know if people stay in the same profession or at the same workplace for years and years like they did in the past, but people tend to find jobs that are more flexible, that may be a good fit. Someone may realize they like a particular subject, but they would prefer to do research in that area rather than whatever they may be doing currently. They may work with machinery and later decide they want to design the machinery they're working with. So we want to be open to allow deaf students themselves to think about those things and make their own decisions, to realize they do have choices. Sometimes, myself included, I'm very guilty of this as a parent. We may recognize a talent in our child and we push them to pursue that one particular thing. But we really need to open it up to allow them to experience life and work for themselves and allow them to make those determinations. And this starts with self-determination. Children need to be able to make their own decisions, to advocate for their needs. And that's truly what self-determination is. The skill of self-determination will serve them well for their entire life. The more self-determination a deaf youth has, the more they will be able to accomplish. They can get the job they would like. They have the potential to earn more money because they will be willing to advocate for themselves and advocate for being promoted within the job they work. You know, some people are comfortable where they are, and some people want to continue to move upward in their job, but it should be up to that deaf youth to pursue whatever they wish. At the same time, you know, we all want to be able to advocate for ourselves, and sometimes it's hard for me as a parent to leave my child to do that on their own. You know, sometimes we see our children do something that we don't necessarily agree with, and we really want to step in and try to fix things for them. But it's critical at a point to allow them to make their choices and make their mistakes. They may experience negative, well, they will experience negative biases from other people. The system is not accessible to everyone, and they will learn that as they go throughout their transition. And deaf youth need to build that advocacy skill for themselves. You know, right now, while they're in high school, it's the perfect place for them to make mistakes and learn from them.
Self-advocacy. There are 4 areas that we recognize from our research, and I'd like to expand upon each of them. Knowledge of self. Do deaf youth know what they want in life? Or what are their abilities, their strengths? Are they good with projects? Maybe they're good with putting things together. A great leader, or maybe they prefer to work alone or have people follow them. So it's important to take a look at each individual and find that out. Their interests, their dreams, and their motivation. Also what their goals are. In addition to that, what is their personality type? Are they more laid back, more assertive? That all plays a part. Are they sensitive, maybe a little more tough, so to speak? Everyone is different. Knowledge of self also means being able to recognize themselves as a deaf youth and their hearing loss. And what does that mean to them? How does that affect other people's view of me? How can I advocate for myself as a deaf person? That's always a struggle. I know often I've seen so many students that I've worked with over the years that don't want to be labeled as a deaf person because they want to be able to fit in. And that's very, very common for deaf youth. I want to fit in, so I don't really want to acknowledge that. Sometimes that can be a pro, but also it brings challenges with it because it can create even more barriers. So how the individual approaches that is a skill that really could be developed well during high school, because then when they go off to college on their own, it's important that they can articulate what their needs are. Next, we have leadership skills. Do they know where to get leadership training and from who? Is it a person or people in their deaf community, or whatever their communities are they engaged and active in that space? Are they able to take advantage of their school activities or vocational activities, work experience, even volunteer hours? I grew up not really leveraging those opportunities. I was just under the assumption that I couldn't or I wasn't allowed. And so I made sure for my daughter that we were going to be engaged, and maybe not even necessarily deaf related, but she had to learn how to engage with hearing people. She always enjoyed doing different events, and so she wanted to volunteer and support big events. And I said, okay, great, let's figure out how are we going to communicate with all these different people when you're in that space. So she was able to develop some of those strategies and communication skills from those interests that she already had. So it's important that deaf youth really develop those leadership skills early on. I'm trying to think of other, maybe in the classroom at school, it's a great way to maybe partner with someone else, get involved in a student organization, or maybe set up an event, maybe a Deaf Awareness Day event. That's a really great opportunity to kind of showcase themselves and their community. So those are just some ideas. Thirdly, communication skills. It really depends on their comfort level and communication style, their preferred mode of communication when requesting different accommodations or assistive technology. We know for those who use ASL and interpreters, it's not that an interpreter accompanies them everywhere they go. So at that point, it's important to consider other communication options for different settings or situations, to have those strategies in place on the front side and make sure that they're familiar with that. I will discuss some additional ideas for accommodations later in my presentation, but starting now, it's really important to address communication differences in different situations, because restaurants could be very simple. They can order on their own. They may point at the menu, that's an option. I use an app on my phone called Big, and then I type my order in there and flip the screen to the waiter or waitress, the server. They're able to do that. Just different ideas that you think of on the front side. It's important that they're comfortable asking for accommodations, and then how to even approach that request. Thinking back to leadership, getting involved in activities, that is an excellent opportunity to figure out those communication skills and develop those whilst they're involved in different activities. The last one here is knowledge of rights. I'm going to go ahead and click to my next slide to expand on that. This diagram shows elementary school. Parents in the school typically, for the most part, are able to make the decisions on the IEP plan for their students, set the goals that must be met educationally, those benchmarks, etc. under the IDEA law. Now, as they transition through middle school and into high school, it's more of the student themselves being more involved and heavily engaged. Now, I myself encourage deaf students to start being invited to and engaged in their IEPs as early as possible. My daughter was engaged and an active participant as early as 4th grade. Now, maybe she wasn't as actively involved as she was later on. She was still learning. But I tell you, by the time she got to freshman year, she entirely took over. She said, I want to take this, this, and this. These are my courses. I want to do these things. I need these type of accommodations. And I sat back and watched and said, okay, we're doing this. And so that was really great. It was a great way to prepare her for college. Because once they take off for college, they are no longer under IDEA. They're under ADA and a 504. And then at that point, they have to request on their own their accommodations, what classes and courses they want to take. Of course, they'll have a conversation possibly with their counselor or an advisor, but really they're on their own once they leave for college. So I think it's great during high school to really help prepare the students, not only for college, but for the workplace, starting a summer job. is really a great opportunity. That encourages them to learn how to disclose their deafness. Do they do it before the interview, during, after? What does that look like? Play out those different scenarios and see what that looks like for everyone. But really taking those training opportunities at an earlier age, and then once they enter the workplace or post-secondary spaces, they have a much better sense of what they want to do, what fits best for them, and what works best for them. Let me check in on my time here to make sure I'm moving through these slides all right. So, some transition ideas and tips. Encourage autonomy. Let those students, those youth, make their own decisions. Often they'll make mistakes. Most likely they will, but they can learn from that. And then recognizing like, oh goodness, that didn't work for me. Next time I'd like to try something else. And then have a conversation with them about that experience. I remember several times my daughter said, you know, this one class that she was taking, it was an AP English course, and she had an interpreter, but it wasn't really feeling like it was a good fit. It wasn't working. And so I talked with her and I said, what would you like to try instead? So she opted for captioning services. It worked really well for that class. For math and science, she preferred an interpreter. So she was changing her accommodations even during her high school years, really experimenting with which one worked best for which class. And she came up with that on her own. She recognized and acknowledged that it wasn't working and she needed to figure out what was going to work best. Obviously, I wasn't there with her in the classroom. So that was really great for her. And you can always check in with your student and say, hey, how are you doing? You're feeling frustrated? Why do you suppose that is? And really get them critically thinking as to why they're frustrated and what the barrier is for them in that particular situation. Maybe even if they can't answer at that time, maybe check in with the teacher or the counselor at their high school and find a better fit for what they're looking for in that space. So during that time, she was developing her autonomy. And as a parent, we held really high expectations for her. And it was critical. You know, that's critical for all deaf youth. It's very important that anyone in their life hold very high expectations for them and support their self-empowerment. Have them make their appointments with the doctor. Have them ask the questions when they're in the doctor's office. Really empower and encourage them to be actively engaged. And those were my expectations for my daughter. And then after that, I would ask her, hey, did you ask about this or that? And say, okay, well, maybe next time ask X, Y, and Z because you didn't get it out this time. And it really got her thinking about, oh, okay, well, I need to do these things on my own. And when they have that sense of pride and that sense of this is how I need to behave in these spaces, they become more comfortable with their identity, their self-worth increases, and their self-confidence increases at the same time. And those skills really influence their abilities in college and in the workplace as well. So really try to empower those students to take the lead on everything independently on their own. You know, sometimes I would see things happening and wince, like that situation maybe could have been better, but at the same time, I allowed it to happen because then she would notice, darn it, or she'd be frustrated. And then that's when we as parents could come in and support her on her way through those experiences. But it was really important that she took the initiative in order to have those experiences. Next, strengthen social networks. My daughter started early on with an interest in math and science, but she just wasn't sure exactly what she wanted to do with it. And so we encouraged her to connect with other deaf role models who were in those varying fields, math and science, engineering, technology. I remember she met with several engineers and she was like, I don't think I want to do that. And so she did some job shadowing, which is a great opportunity. It's a one-day opportunity. She visited Samsung. We had a friend who worked there. And so she was on site with them and she thought, well, computer engineering is not really for me either. And so we kind of moved through the list and just asking questions. She asked a lot of questions to the person who worked at Samsung. She was able to get a really good sense of what it's like to be at that job as a deaf person. You know, what would she need to do if she worked there? How much communication was involved on a daily basis? How much teamwork was there? Would you work in isolation? So it was a really good experience for her. Role models really can provide that support with developing identity, developing a sense of who they are, and developing their identity and confidence as a deaf person. So I really encourage all of you to get them in touch with deaf role models. My daughter learned some tricks of the trade in terms of how to navigate specific situations and such as well. And my ways to navigate things were a little bit different than her. But, you know, I come from, you know, the old days, and she was telling me, she's the one who actually told me about Big on my phone. She said, hey, you know, Mom, there's an app for that. And she learned it from another deaf person, a role model in her life. And so she was able to learn some of the newer advantages, and that was really building her self-esteem, that she could find solutions on her own for what barriers she ran up against. And so again, I would really encourage you to have your deaf youth connect with deaf role models. Facilitate goal setting. You know, aiming high is just critical. Let them develop their study skills, time management skills, independent living skills, conflict resolution skills, so many skills, and how to manage all of these things. Deaf youth will always have goals. They may not achieve them all, but developing some skills from each one is important. Sometimes, you know, I don't always just get out there and get out after it and advocate right away. I may sit back and wait and see how it goes, whereas other people might be more assertive. And that's fine. I think, you know, each person is different and will learn different. It's just imperative that they're given that opportunity to brainstorm ideas and figure out how those individual situations could be better, and reflect on their actions. Even reflect, for example, time management. My daughter is really good with her time management. In fact, she decided that she needed to get a calendar, and I said, hey, technology, you can put everything in your computer. And she said, nope, that doesn't work for me. I have to have pen and paper. She has beautiful handwriting. She's very proud of her handwriting. And so she made this very fancy calendar and journal. But see, she noticed that her time management skills had to be on a hard copy pen and paper. That's what works for her. And without it, she noticed that she was missing things, she was forgetting things, overlooking deadlines. So it's been, you know, a work in progress for her. Being very organized is important while in school. That skill can transition from high school into college. Teachers, professors in college will not remind them of their homework, will not check in on them on the little things. It just doesn't look like that anymore in post-secondary spaces. So deaf youth in high school really need to recognize that fact, like, oh goodness, I'm not going to have that anymore once I graduate. I'm going to be responsible for my time. I'm responsible for submitting my paperwork, my assignments, and anything that's been assigned to me. And so it's very important to kind of help with that transition during high school, so they're prepared for that as they leave and head to college.
Okay, now Accommodations 101. You know, over the years as a disability services counselor, very often I would have deaf students I would meet with during their first intake appointment as they were registering with our office to receive accommodations. Sometimes they didn't even recognize that they needed to request accommodations. So they would come in after class had started. Or it was often assumed that they needed to just use the same accommodations they had used in high school. And they may hear well enough to sit in the front of the classroom and have someone take notes in case they missed anything. I let students know, college classes are bigger. The acoustics in the room may not allow you to hear well. You may not be able to get a front row seat. The classes are also more fast-paced. The instructor may not speak as clearly. So there are all kinds of factors that are at play when that student transitions to college. I would look at their audiogram and let them know what they missed ask them what they missed in class, what they were able to understand. And many students, I learned, were not even familiar with captioning services. And students sometimes were resistant and said, I always sat in the front and I was fine. And so I said, let's make an agreement for the first week. I want to provide captions and let's see if you like it. And if you don't, we won't continue, because it was easier for us to remove a service rather than try to get services in place on the second or third week of class. I would say 95% of the time, students realized that captioning was a lifesaver in their class. It helped them with things that they were missing, and they realized how fast the class went, the fact that the instructor rarely looked directly at the student, and all types of factors they just weren't quite prepared for. So my point here is, as you're working with deaf youth, realize there are a variety of accommodations, and maybe for one class they need captions, and for another class like art, they may not, because the instructor may work more closely one-on-one with them. Whereas in a history class that is a complete lecture, captions may work better for that student. Often students aren't even familiar with the options or that they have an option. They may be asking a friend to take notes, which is perfectly fine if they're comfortable with that. But if not, then the instructor can be asked to find a note taker. The instructor may have their own notes. So it's important to explore what the accommodation options are. And I have a few things listed here: note taking, sign language interpreters. Sign language interpreters, it's important to identify the type of interpreter you need and what it is the student needs from an interpreter. Some want English terminology, and some want to make sure they're capturing the key words and getting those spelled out. So it's important that the student have the opportunity to discuss those needs with the interpreter. They may not have had that opportunity much in high school, but they need to realize, especially in college, they are in control of their access needs. Speech to text services, that's something like CPrint, CART, Typewell, and other options. And students should be able to choose which they prefer. Some students very much prefer Typewell over CART because they hear enough to capture what's being said, and Typewell sufficiently fills in any gaps. So each individual student will have their preferred way of communicating. Visual fire alarms is something important. The school is responsible to provide that, and often students don't realize that, especially if they're living on campus in the dorm. That is a critical piece to not overlook. Captioned media. Whenever the student sees the syllabus, if they see that a film will be shown, it is important to remind the instructor to ensure that media is captioned. The student needs to learn they have to take the step themselves to ask about it. It needs to be taken care of well in advance, because captions can't be arranged at the last minute. Assistive listening devices can be very beneficial, especially in large classrooms. Maybe a student didn't need it in a small high school classroom, but in a large college setting, they may benefit greatly from assistive listening devices. It's important that they can experiment with their accommodations as they go to college. In the first week or two, they will experience some trial and error as they test out whatever accommodation may work best for them. If they can test those things out earlier rather than later, that would be beneficial. If they go to a concert or a special event, maybe allow them to try out different accommodations so that they are aware of what works best for them. All right, I need to speed up and get moving a little bit. Let's talk about vocational rehabilitation. You can see 0.6 up to 3.7% of deaf students use VR funding to pay for college. Here it's DARS, Department of Rehabilitation Services, Department of Assistive Rehabilitation and Services. They can help deaf youth with these things that are listed here on the slide. When that student gets to college, DARS can help with transportation costs. If they have to take the bus every day, and there are other expenses, they can get support with that. With accommodations, meaning if they're going to a workshop, they could cover the cost of that workshop that trains them how to engage in a job search. Equipment or other assistive technology, like maybe a tablet in order to see captions so that they can use their laptop for schoolwork. That is something you can always check into with DARS. Job-related services could be specific types of training. If a job requires CPR training and they need to take that course, DARS can help pay for that. Equipment and clothing. If welding, for example, requires steel-toed boots and other types of equipment, deaf youth can ask DARS for support in all of these areas to see where they can get help, whether it be with tutoring or physical equipment. DARS is there to make sure that those students complete their goals and are able to obtain a job. So I recommend starting a case with DARS as soon as they enter high school. At age 14 is technically the age where they can open a case. Summer camps and training. Summer camps are fantastic ways for students to learn. My student went to 2 summer camps that had to do with job exploration, and they had specific deaf professionals that came in and presented at those camps. And it was a wonderful way to network as well as learn about different job opportunities and possible interests. And that affected her changing her goal and major. Okay, I'm going to try to get through this pretty quickly here. So I'll just touch on this. Here are some of the NDC resources we have at our website. These handouts are all fantastic. They support what we've been talking about today, so explore that on your own time. We have partnered with Kansas State University to develop a self-determination assessment. And you can encourage your deaf youth to take that, to identify their own strengths and weaknesses in terms of making choices, setting goals, and self-perception. It will produce a report that shows that student's strengths as well as areas they can improve their self-determination skills. It gives you things you can act on and goals that those students can set to improve their self-determination. This assessment helps students look at ways that they can take solid steps to improve self-determination, set and meet goals. Oh, excuse me, something here was unplugged from my computer. Let me get that plugged back in. My apologies. Okay. So this slide is showing Deafverse. It's our online game created by a team of deaf people. The game itself is in American Sign Language, spoken English, and captions.
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
And as they play the game, they face different scenarios where they use advocacy skills. For example, maybe in one scenario, they go to a movie theater and there are no captions. So they have the option to choose whether they leave, whether they go talk to the manager about fixing it, or they pick up their popcorn and throw it at the screen. So as they make their choice, it leads them down a path. Like, let's say that they choose give up and go home. Well, they'll later see down the line they've missed an opportunity. So it encourages them next time to maybe choose talking to a manager. It's a safe place for students to learn and make mistakes and develop skills while they're playing the game. It also comes with an activity kit that parents and instructors can use to work with deaf youth and talk through the different scenarios. There are some activities where the deaf youth can explore on their own, like checking to see if their school has visual fire alarms. And as they go do that activity and return it to the instructor or their parent, then they're able to talk through what their options are. Let's say there aren't fire alarms that are visual. Well, then what would their next steps be? Well, we have activity guides that guide you through various scenarios like that. I also want to encourage you, Hands and Voices has online training as well. Transition online module for parents and teens. I have used this myself, and I strongly encourage you to consider this option. In closing, a key takeaway from this session should be that the transition process is critical to deaf success. It's critical that you as adults in their lives believe in them, continue the dialogue with them, encourage them to go out and do things independently and even make mistakes, to identify those mistakes and discuss other possible paths. We have videos on our YouTube page that are called Deaf Success Stories. And these people have shared what tools they had used to see deaf success in where they currently are in their lives. So these videos are a great opportunity for you to sit down and watch with your deaf youth and talk through them. We have 8 minutes remaining, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have right now. You can use the chat box if you have a question.
This is Michaela. We'll wait just a minute to see if anyone has any questions. I know I have learned a lot today, and for my own daughter, who is about to have her high school art in 2 days, we're going to be exploring some of these options together with her and utilizing that game, Deafverse. So we're excited about that. We do have a question in the chat box from Sarah Covert. She asked about the link to the assessment. I believe this is the link to the self-determination assessment.
Sure, let me see here. There you go.
This is perfect.
So it's self-determination.org. I don't have it in front of me, but if I remember correctly, when you do that, there is a link for students, a link for teachers and educators, but the student link links to what's called the SDI, the Self-Determination Inventory, and it's SDI:SC. But you will see that, and you can choose whether you see it in American Sign Language, in spoken English and captions. It probably takes 10 minutes to complete, and it will generate a report. It's really a fantastic assessment. I'm not sure about the Texas Workforce Commission. I'm not sure about that. I see that question if it's the same one used by TWC. I don't know the answer to that.
This is Michaela. We'll pause for a minute and give people an opportunity to ask questions. While we're waiting, I just want to let you know that Lore is working on a graphic that she's going to be sharing with me and Teresa. And Teresa and I will follow up today's webinar with an email to everyone that will include that graphic and list a lot of the resources that she has shared with us today. So if you do have a question that's not answered by that graphic, I'm sure Lore would be happy to take your questions via email to her. I hope I haven't overextended you, Lore. I apologize if I did.
Oh, no, please do. We're here for you. And I'm here as a mom, as an advocate, and as a friend to partner with you, whatever the need may be. And if you need any specific technical information, I can draw on my colleagues at National Deaf Center to get you the support you need.
This is Michaela. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think we'll pause just another minute to see if there are any more questions. I do want to thank Lore for her time today. Thank you so much for your collaboration with Texas Hands and Voices so that we can bring this to our community of professionals and parents. We are very, very thankful for professionals like yourself who collaborate with us so that we can encourage parents and professionals to continue their self-growth and learning. Yes, Karen is thanking you for your presentation today, Lore. We also want to point out a big thank you to our funding partner, the Statewide Outreach Center at Texas School for the Deaf. We are thankful for their funding of the Guide by Your Side program and Texas Hands and Voices. We will wait just another second here to see if there are any more questions.
This is Teresa. I believe there was one right before asking if there were classes that the team can take to learn these skills.
This is Lore. National Deaf Center doesn't have classes for students. Well, we do have a Deaf 101 course, but specifically for us, we have something specifically for Deafverse. That online game is, you could call it a class. It's a game. Otherwise, we don't have anything built specifically for students outside of Deafverse. There is an activity book, and it's a really fun game to go through. So it's learning while you play. So for all intents and purposes, it is a class and it's a game. The Statewide Outreach Center, I recommend reaching out there as well. And I know Texas Hands and Voices and Hands and Voices in general provides classes on the topics of transition. So I know Astra is also a great program, ASTRA, and I recommend that. I've completed their course and it was very helpful as a parent. So there are a few things I would encourage you to connect with your friends in Texas Hands and Voices and ask them for other class recommendations. the National Hands and Voices website has been beneficial to me for finding classes as they are offered.
Thank you, Lore. We do have another question here for you. Are there any available resources in Spanish that NDC offers?
Yes, we do. I will include that in my handouts that I prepared to give you today. We have quite a number of resources and videos that are available in Spanish. If there is something specific that you would like, then check with us here at NDC. And because if we don't have it in Spanish, we're happy to figure that out and work that out.
This is Michaela. Thank you so much. Well, this takes us to the top of the hour, so I think we are going to be respectful of everyone's time. A great, big, huge thank you to Lore once again, and to our NDC interpreters, as well as our captioner for today. I'm going to let Teresa give any closing messages if she has any. Thank you so much for joining.
Yes, thank you once again, Laura. We appreciate everyone for joining us today. I do want to share that we will eventually, here in the next few days, have the recording of today's session available. We'll upload it to our YouTube channel, as well as add a link to our social media, our website, and so just keep an eye out for that. I believe Michaela will probably also send a link to everyone once we've actually uploaded it. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at the next one. Laura, thank you so much for your time today. We truly appreciate all of the knowledge you've shared.
Thank you, and I appreciated the opportunity.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you all next time.